Iceland has actually been quite an active player in international organization, in international relations and regional cooperation as well. We are a founding member of NATO, for example. We joined EFTA in 1970, highly controversial when we did that. The European Economic Area, I don't know how many of you know what that's all about, but this means that Iceland, Norway and Liechtenstein, 3 EFTA countries, we are actually a part of the internal market. We are a part of the internal market, although we are not a member of the EU. And I'll explain a bit more about that a bit later. And this puts us in a special situation, or in a privileged, in a way, relationship with the European Union. This was also extremely hotly debated in Iceland and highly controversial when we joined the EEA in 1944. Same with Schengen, rather controversial. And now you could argue that the EU application is a logical next step in our foreign relations and our foreign policy. But unlike the previous steps Iceland took as a country in closer relations with other countries, we will have a referendum on the accession treaty once that is in place. This demonstrates quite clearly, and now I come back to the European Economic Area Agreement, how closely integrated we actually already are with the European Union, and how close our relations are with the EU. The EEA agreement, when it was established, when it entered into force 1st of January 1994, we took over a huge chunk of the acquis communautaire, of the rule book of the European Union. It was some tens of thousands of pages of acquis that we had to adopt, transpose, and implement in our domestic legislation. And since then, and this is the uniqueness of this agreement, we have been constantly adopting legislation from the EU, which fall under the auspices of the EEA, namely internal market acquis. So as the EU has been developing its rules, its acquis, on the internal market, the 4 freedoms, goods, services, people, and capital, we have always had to take them back home and transpose them into our own domestic legislation. Same with Norway and Liechtenstein. This is how we organize the accession talks into 33 substantive chapters. And out of these 33 chapters, we have fully adopted and transposed the acquis from the EU into our domestic legislation. And all of these chapters here, these 10 chapters, there are another 11 chapters that are largely covered by the EEA. There may be some sub-chapters that are not there. And even in those chapters that are not covered by the European Economic Area, we are in close cooperation in many of these, in many of these areas, such as in security issues. We are a part of NATO, as I told you, and 21 of the member states of the European Union are members of NATO. So we are in close cooperation with them on that. We are in Schengen, so judiciary and fundamental rights, for example, justice, freedom, and security. These are all issues we are closely. We are working closely with the European Union and the member states. So you could say that the hardcore issues remaining outside are the usual suspects, namely agriculture, fisheries, monetary union, regional policy. And as I already mentioned, through the EEA, it's a very dynamic agreement. Every year we are transposing legislation from the EU to follow legislative developments, because there should be no, the name of the game of the EEA is homogeneity. And when I say EEA, it's the 27 member states of the European Union and the 3 EFTA countries. So we have 30 EEA countries actually. And there should be no difference in doing business in Iceland, Reykjavik or Rome, Germany, Norway, and so on, because we have the same legislation. And we applied in July 2009 for membership. We achieved candidate country status a year later. And a year later from that, 2 years after we applied, we started the actual negotiations and started to open the first chapters. And by the end of last year, by the end of 2012, we had opened 11 chapters and we have provisionally closed 8. So we are off. We are off with a very good start, and this again demonstrates the state of play in Iceland and how closely we are already integrated with the EU. So you cannot compare us, for example, with Turkey or Croatia that are starting from scratch. We've never expected to get a special treatment or any different treatment from others, but we want to be treated on our own merit, and that's exactly what has happened. The fact of the matter is, as Olli Rehn stated once while he was enlargement commissioner, if accession process is a marathon, we have actually completed something like 40 kilometers in terms of acquis. So these are the chapters that we have opened, and eight of which we have closed. And we were quite happy that chapter 23, which is actually not part of the EA, we were able to open and close that at the same meeting. This was one of the most difficult ones for Croatia, for example. So I think it was symbolically important that we were able, for example, to open and close that. As we proceed through this year, we are hoping that we will have opened at least all of the chapters and closed a number of chapters also, although we will probably not be able to close all of them, but at least our ambition is to try to open as humanly possible, open as many chapters as humanly possible this year. Just to sum up, a year from our application, we achieved candidate country status, and as I've just mentioned, we have now we are off to a good start with opening and closing chapters. So it's off to a good, solid start. We are quite happy with the way in which things have progressed. But having said that, the honeymoon is in a way over. We have been dealing mainly with some of the lighter chapters, if you will, less complex ones, because we have already adopted most of the acquis, so there isn't actually much to negotiate. So the main issues, I want to dwell a bit on the main issues we need to deal with. And you probably are all aware that fisheries are immensely important for my country. And actually Iceland is the first candidate country that where fisheries are so prominent. Fisheries were indeed important for Norway, but in relative terms not nearly as important as in our case. And actually Norway negotiated, as you may recall, a membership, but rejected the treaty in a referendum. And one of the main reasons, I'm not saying it's the only one, obviously it's more complex than that, but one of the main reasons, according to many, it was the deal on fisheries. That it was not good enough in view of many of the Norwegians. So you can imagine in our case, if fisheries were important and sensitive for the Norwegians, it's even more so in my country. Fisheries are the backbone of our economy. We've developed a very efficient fishing industry. It is a high-tech industry, if you will. It's not subsidized. We've managed to develop a management system where we have a balance between the capacity and our fishing resources. And people are understandably concerned what the implications would be for our fisheries if we were to join, as the common fisheries policy
of the European Union, its track record could be better. And at least in our opinion, we believe we are running we've done somewhat of a better job. And this is not only an economic issue for us, it's in a way a part of our identity, fisheries, part of our sense of independence and so on. We've gone through enormous struggles in developing our fisheries, extending the economic zone. We were in the forefront in developing the law of the sea, which is now recognized international law, the 200-mile economic zone. We went through the so-called Cold Wars with Germany, Belgium, and not least the Brits, but they were all eventually resolved. But this happened when we were extending our economic zone from 12 to 50 miles and 50 to 200 in a few decades. So it is a very, very delicate issue. This is just to demonstrate to you how, in relative terms, fisheries are important. This shows the export value of fisheries in Iceland. This is in Icelandic, actually. And you see, this is Iceland, this is Norway, and this is the rest of the EU member states. And just to put it in context for you, we are 300,000, a nation of 300,000 people. We are catching something like 1.4 million to 1.7 million tons of marine products in an average year. The EU of 500 million is catching something like 4.6 million tons a year. So we, 300,000, we are catching something like 30% of what the EU of 500 million is catching. We are doing this with about 3,000 fishermen and workers. Whereas I would have to check, but I've heard that within the EU you have something like 200,000 fishermen. So you see, I'm just driving home the fact that we are running this as a real business. This is not. Obviously, it's extremely important for us, for some of our rural communities, fisheries. Some of the small villages we have around the coast are entirely dependent on fisheries. So again, just to explain why this is such an important issue for us. And you see the small communities around our coast. About 60% of the nation lives in the Reykjavik area. And around the coastline you have a number, as you see, of small villages and fishing, fish processing plants and fishing boats. And Iceland is, in terms of size, it's a little bit over 100,000 square kilometers. We are about, for example, 3 times the size of Belgium, and we are the most sparsely populated country in Europe. We only have 3 persons per square kilometer in Iceland. And there is, this is inhabitable, and again, the smaller communities around the coastline are extremely dependent on our fisheries. So fisheries is going to be one of the key issues. It's obviously not the only issue, although I'm focusing a bit on it here and now. There are a lot of other issues involved with regard to the membership of the EU. But the common fisheries policy of the European Union is designed for circumstances that are different from that we have in Iceland. The common fisheries policy is designed for circumstances you have like in the Baltic Sea. You have many countries surrounding the same sea, catching the same fish. So common stocks, and you need common fisheries policy. Same with the North Sea, Bay of Biscay, and so on. And actually within the common fisheries policy, you do not have one uniform system, not at all. You have different rules for the Baltic Sea, for example, another system of rules for the Mediterranean, and also for the Madeira, Azores,
Canary, and even Malta. So that it is within the common fisheries policy quite a bit of flexibility. And the fact that Iceland's economic zone is not bordering any of the economic zones of the European Union, which is unique in an EU context. And most of our stocks, 70% of our stocks, are actually local, stay within our economic zone, and are only caught by Icelanders. These are facts, and these facts should lend themselves to a solution we can build on. And the concepts within the common fisheries policy are already there. We can build on them to find a solution that would respect the principles of the European Union and the common fisheries policy and accommodate our specificities and concerns. Agriculture is another issue which is highly important, economically not, but politically it's quite sensitive. Again, Iceland is very sparsely populated. Agriculture is extremely important to maintain the rural areas. Iceland is, however, not very competitive in terms of agriculture because of the natural circumstances. The growth period is very short. It's very limited, our agriculture. We have something like 4,000 farmers in Iceland, and it's mainly dairy and sheep. And our production is not very competitive in prices. We would like to think that they are competitive in quality. Of course, we think our milk is the best in the world, and our sheep meat is the best in the world, and all that. But and this is fully recognized by our friends within the EU, both by the Commission and experts there that have come on visits, and we've had exploratory talks, and representatives of the EU. I mean, people realize that to maintain a thriving agriculture in Iceland is a challenge. Our agriculture is heavily subsidized, and we use very high tariffs to protect our agricultural production. But I think there are ways to accommodate that, and there is flexibility within the common agricultural policy. And the Finns, for example, and the Swedes, they negotiated specific solutions for their own agriculture called Arctic agriculture, where all agriculture north of 62nd parallel can receive extra support, and we will no doubt need something like that and built on that concept. So we are looking into that. Regional policy is obviously very important as well for us. We are facing some challenges in regional policy, like many other countries. And as I mentioned earlier, 60% of the nation now lives in Reykjavik and the Reykjavik area. And people are constantly moving from the rural areas to the capital. So we think, in terms of regional policy, irrespective of potential membership, we could learn a lot from the EU, which has devised quite potent instruments to support the regions within the EU. We believe that we probably have a lot to learn and probably to gain from EU membership in that respect. And finally, monetary issues is probably this. Well, it's extremely important, obviously, for us. We have now tried it on our own skin what a challenge it is to try to sustain an independent currency. Iceland, I believe, is the smallest economy in the world with an independent currency. And we as I said, we've now tried it on our own skin what a challenge it is to try to maintain an open and liberal economy where we are a part of the internal market with free capital movement and cross-border banking and so on in a globalized world. And it's next to impossible. Obviously you are aware of the crash we suffered, and where 85% of our banking system collapsed. Our stock market was nearly wiped out in a single day nearly. So it is extremely challenging. We had to impose capital controls, which are still in place. And we are trying to figure out, our government, how and when it could be lifted. There are a lot of economists that believe it's next to impossible to lift the capital controls again. So we look and this is actually one of the chief arguments for EU membership, economic arguments. In any case, of course, there are political as well. And this is what the mandate from Parliament says, which we use, which is our guideline in our work, that we should try to join the ERM2 as soon as possible after membership and adopt the euro as soon as possible. It will obviously take some years after membership, but this is one of the main arguments because, like I said, the krona has been a source of instability. It's made our economy, yes, flexible. In a way, it has helped us climb out of the recession, but the debt has close to doubled. And actually, net exports have not increased as they have, for example, here in Ireland. FDI has not increased as it has here in Ireland. Yes, it has helped our export sector in terms of more kronas coming in. But what we've seen, for example, is that according to research and reports from the Competition Authority, the prices of household goods, basic goods, have risen by 60% in 6 years. And this is mainly because of the krona. And in spite of the capital controls, we now have an inflation of around 6% in roughly a year. So it is a challenge. Just briefly, a couple of minutes maybe on public opinion in Iceland, because we are aware that our friends within the EU are concerned that there is not enough public support for potential membership. Polls indicate indeed that there is a majority against membership as things look now. But I tend to remind them that a year before Sweden, for example, joined the EU, support for membership in Sweden was 24%. A year before the UK joined the EU, back in the 70s, if you want to go that far back, support for membership was only 15%. Our polls indicate that support for membership is less than 40%. The latest one was 37, and plus 60 was against membership, if you only take those that had an opinion. But we had one poll also, that was the latest poll. We had one in April of last year. Then we had over 40% support for membership. And this is in spite of the Eurozone debt crisis. I would have thought that this indicates actually there's quite a good foundation. There's a lot of people that are skeptical, may be willing to lean towards membership or not. And then when you are asked, and we have these polls, we have now 4 polls in a little more than a year, where people ask, do you want us to finalize, do you want the government of Iceland to finalize the accession talks and have a referendum on the treaty? And then 2/3 of those that are polled say yes, we want to finalize and see the outcome and have a referendum. And 90% of those polled, this is a very interesting result, 90% of those polled have an opinion. Whereas when we have had opinion polls recently on the support of the political parties, only about half are willing to indicate what party they may support. So there's a huge political vacuum out there. There's a lack of confidence in the political establishment. But with regard to the question of whether we should have the accession treaty and the referendum, there's a huge support for that. So this to me indicates that the confidence in the process and the credibility of the accession process is very good. This indicates to me that people want to see the outcome. They are pragmatic. They want to understand what this means. Other polls indicate, the Eurobarometer indicates that 57% of those polled say that they don't know enough about the EU and implications of EU membership to have an opinion. So there is also a huge demand for more information and enlightened debate, and that's exactly one of the challenges we have to deal with now, and use the accession process and the talks to educate people so that they can take an informed opinion, take an informed decision at the end of the day. So we are very much on track in the accession process. We think this has been very good quality of work, both on the EU side, and we are quite happy with the way in which things have worked out in terms of substance and so on our side. The debate will no doubt continue to heat up on this issue. We will have elections spring 2013. This will no doubt be one of the main issues in the election campaign next winter. But information is increasing, the dialogue is increasing, and but I think people's attitude will very much depend on the treaty, the outcome of that, and also whether people will be convinced that we are actually better off with the euro. That debate hasn't really taken off yet. What implications euro membership or adoption of the euro may mean for their budget, for their wallet. But this is also controversial in Iceland. Some argue that we are better off with the krona. It gives us flexibility. It's an economic policy instrument, but we can discuss that in further detail if you want. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm willing to entertain some questions if you